Hi, everybody. I'm Bonnie, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm really happy to be here with y'all. Thank you for inviting me to share, Stephen. And Max, thanks for throwing my name in the hat. I have been a part of this wonderful worldwide fellowship since January 16th of 1985. And for that, I'm truly grateful. I always want to thank God for those that came before me. The people that I came in the rooms and met for the first time not only told me about the 3 legacies of Alcoholics Anonymous, but they also showed me about the 3 legacies of Alcoholics Anonymous. Recovery, as in the first word of the first step, we do recover. Unity through the traditions and in service, and service together as a group or other places, as we all know. So I really do thank the ones that came before me, because I did learn exactly what Stephen said. When I'm asked to do something in Alcoholics Anonymous, if there's any way, anyhow, I'm going to show up and say yes, because it's given me so much. I also want to say, read something before I get going. Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other, it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves, and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. And that's from Alcoholics Anonymous, the 4th edition, in the chapter called We Agnostics, on page 55. And I read that just due to my experience, strength, and hope has a lot to do with higher power certainly being there when I didn't even acknowledge that. I was born with a congenital heart defect. I was the last child of 4 and the only girl. And in 1965, when a child was born with a total anomaly of the heart, which really means a transposition of the greater vessels, the left ventricles of the heart were connected to the right side of the heart, and the right ventricles were connected to the left. So everything was backwards, and one side of the heart wasn't getting any blood. The only reason I lived through that experience was because I had 3 holes in between the chambers of the heart. And because I had a little bit of blood leaking over to the chamber that wasn't getting any blood, I lived until there came a point that my kidneys were failing and I had to get on an operating table. Well, I was also born into a home where alcoholism was extremely active, extremely daily. There was a lot of movement with drinking. There was a lot of violence. There was a lot of activity, a lot of yelling, a lot of that. And so I learned about alcoholism in my spirit, mind, and body well before I ever took a drink. It did have an effect on me. Because of that, my parents didn't have the money to pay the surgeon in the hospital to get me on that operating table. And the hospital, because of the risk of the surgery at that time, they wanted 90% of all of the money down first before they'd operate. And when I was born, 10 days after I was born, my grandfather beat my grandmother to death together with his lover due to alcoholism and a drunken party and fight that they were in. And my mother knew he had killed her mother. So that was my grandfather. As my parents didn't have the money to put me on that operating table, my mother hadn't spoken to her father because he murdered her mother for about 3 years. See, in the home that she grew up in, she had seen him beat her too many times. And as he denied killing her, she said, I know you didn't. I've seen you beat her too many times. So my mother picked up the phone and called this man whom she hadn't talked to for 3 years and reached out to him and asked him for the money, because he did have the money for me to be put on that operating table. And he came with the money. And back then it was like money in a brown paper bag. They didn't have Western Union and all those other things, So I was on the operating table, and what that surgeon did was exactly what I talked about. The miracles that a power certainly greater than any of us could have done. In sobriety, I've had some heart complications due to chemotherapy. And the cardiologists that I've talked to about 10 years ago said, that's just unheard of what that surgeon did for you in 1965. Unheard of. It's a miracle, a medical miracle. And so that is the first of many. There was, we at my house, as I was recovering from this surgery, we had an angel that she raised us, actually, me and my brothers. As my mom worked full time, my dad did the thing called drinking every day, day in and day out. And this angel was wonderful. She gave us things like a reason to play, a reason to be free from the insanity of the disease of alcoholism as it played out. And she also was an angel that packed a 22 in her purse and a switchblade as well. So that worked out good for us. Several times my father would come home very, very intoxicated and threatening to kill everybody in the house. And thank goodness, we were wee little. We'd get behind her. She was quite a big woman. So I don't think my dad would have crossed her, but maybe drunk he would have. But she just, directly after this threat, just moseyed over to her purse and grabbed her switchblade out of there and held it down at her side. And we're all standing behind her, me and my 3 brothers. And she just pops that switchblade open and said, well, you're just going to have to get through me first to get to these kids. And he comes towards her and she just slices him across his gut. And we see the blood just trail across the walls. And she says, well, I believe you're going to have to drive yourself to the hospital. I've got your kids to take care of. Just as calm. And I think she'd probably dealt with a few alcoholics in her past too. I don't know, but she was pretty calm about it all. And her purpose was to keep us safe. And that's why I call her an angel. Several other experiences happened that way in my childhood growing up, but it wasn't long after that I found alcohol myself. And when I found alcohol myself, there was no question in my mind that I am a chronic alcoholic, as the doctor's opinion talks to us about and teaches us about. And that soon as I put that first drink in, immediately, I not only knew there was a reason to live, there was a real reason to live, But I had a new friend. I had a new comfort. I had a new purpose in my life. I had a new phenomenon of craving happen instantly. I need and I want more. And that's what I did every day, day in and day out. It wasn't hard with an alcoholic in my home to find more. And I did. I did whatever it took to find more, find ways and means to put more in. I loved and loved the feeling alcohol gave me. So I didn't anymore have to be concerned or care about what was going on around me. You know, I didn't have to feel it. I didn't have to acknowledge it. I was totally obliviated from it. And even if I wasn't obliviated from it, if it went on, I didn't care because it squashed all of the shame. It squashed all of the remorse, the guilt, the hurt, the sadness, the fear. It was gone. I like that. I like that because I didn't have that before then. So that was a love affair that started, and it was like me riding on top of a locomotion that did not have brakes. I was ready, and I would stand up there ready for my next, and my next, and my next. And that went on for quite some time. You know, by the time I was 16, that was 12 years old when I first took my first drink and got going. And by the time I was 16, I had gone to other extracurricular activities as well. And I had left the house by 14. All the kids in our home, all my brothers, we all had left by the time we were about 14. So living on the streets was a lot better than being in there. And I came home for a little reprieve. That meant a shower and a bite to eat and any kind of liquor that I could steal that was there at the house. That was my little reprieve. And my mom came in from work and she was saying, she of course realized the state I was in and completely drunk. And she started saying how sorry I was, good for nothing, never amount to anything, can't do anything with you, you'll never be anything, la, 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 on and on and on. And, you know, really, the liquor helped me up until that point. But when the person that put those messages inside, right here and inside my soul, and I heard them saying that, my mom, I already knew it was right. I already knew those things. And when I heard her saying that, it just really confirmed and it affirmed so much of what I already felt about myself. And that was only 4 years in. So I knew they had a pistol in their back room. I went into her bedroom and on my daily reprieves at the house, I'd look at that gun, make sure it was loaded. It was loaded, fully loaded. I got that pistol out of the drawer and put it to my head. She came to the back room following after me, and I grabbed her by the shirt collar and I held her there. And she used to always make a statement when we were kids, I'll just kill myself. When things got so out of control in the house, that was the statement that she'd make. I grabbed her by the shirt collar and I held that gun to my head and I said, you'll watch me kill myself. You're too chicken to do it. I held her by her shirt and I put that gun to my head and I cocked it and pulled the trigger. The gun didn't fire. I don't know why. I have no idea why. She got away because I was stunned that the gun didn't fire. She went into the front room, called the police officer. Next thing I know, he's coming down the hallway because I'm still in the back room. I pass him in the hallway, go to the kitchen, and in a butcher knife rack, grab the biggest stainless steel butcher knife out of that rack that I could get. I held it with two hands above my head and rammed it in my gut as hard and as fast as I could. And about 2 inches of the knife, the end of the knife just broke. Stainless steel blade. It just snapped off. It sliced my t-shirt, and I had a tiny, tiny little cut on my abdomen area. And the police officer stopped about 6 feet behind me. And he looked at the incident, and he looked at me, and he looked at my mom, and he started tears running down his eyes. And he said, if I have never seen God work in my life, I'm seeing it today. And he was just steady, tears rolling down his face. So that's why I read what I read about calamity and a fundamental idea. Well, they took me to jail. I stayed 3 days in jail, and then they came back and they said, do you want to kill yourself still? I said, oh, I guess not. If I have to be in here, I don't, Nobody asked if I needed help, wanted to talk about help, needed anything, nothing. So I was out the door, just like I'd been out the door since I was 14 years old. And I thought, okay, I'll take this circus show to another state. My whole life was a circus show. I promise you that. And I went to move to another state, and of course got involved with somebody that could support all that I needed in my life. And all that was really a bunch more of everything, drinking, everything. And one night I was 19 years old, and this gentleman that I took up with, that's what we say in the South, you took up with somebody. I don't know if y'all say that there, but we took up with somebody. The man I took up with, let's say, was saying all these things that my mom said that same day when I was 16. He was saying all the things about how good for nothing I was. I'd never amount to anything. All you do is ruin everything that comes into your life. You destroy everything. You're sorry, da 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 da, on and on. And again, in those words, those were the things I already knew about myself. And in those moments at 16 and 19, I could not escape, no matter what I put in my body. Those thoughts and those feelings of deep shame, remorse. And so he had bought a gun. I don't have very good luck with guns. So there was a gun in my nightstand drawer. I don't have a really good relationship with guns, but I can tell you another story. It was fully loaded. It was a 38 hollow point bullets, and he'd taken the gun out, fired it the day before, just make sure all the rounds worked. It did. In the area, there was a Metroplex rapist, and he had hit several women in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and that's where I was living at the time. And that was the reason to purchase the gun. And that night, I was hearing all those wonderful things I already knew about myself. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I got that gun out of the nightstand drawer, and I put it to my head and cocked it back and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The bullet didn't leave the gun. And I looked at the gun, I put it in my lap, and I cussed the gun, and I was so upset, and I couldn't believe it wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. And I put it right back up at my head, and I cocked it back one again, pulled the trigger again. Bullet didn't leave the gun. And oh, I'm so mad. I was so mad and so upset. I had the gun in my lap. Third time I pulled the trigger, I blew a hole in my leg the size of a 50-cent piece. And I have to have a knee replacement on May 19th for that. However, I got 40 years out of the thing, which is, I think, pretty good. Anyway, he heard that. He ran in there, scooped me up off the bed, and took me to the emergency room. And I was sick. I was a very sick alcoholic. Probably about 5'9.5", and I weighed 90 pounds, and laying on that emergency room table with a hole in my leg. 2 bullets that didn't go off at my head, right up here, 2 bullets. police officer asked about what happened. And he said, "Why are you in this state?" I said, "You know what? My favorite thing is drinking. And that's all I have been doing all these years. And that's all I want to do. And so what are you going to do about it?" It can be laying there, 90 pounds, 5'9", hole in my leg. I'm thinking I have some sort of ego, pride left in my life. And I'm challenging a police officer. And I had a broken leg, and my leg's getting bigger and bigger from the bullet hit, shattering my tibia. And that is the delusion that alcohol, I live that way. The delusion that alcohol gave me was that I thought at that moment I still had some semblance of power in my life. That led me to the crazy house for about 4 months. That whole stunt right there. And so I kind of liked it because I got a roof over my head. I got 3 meals. I got a bed to sleep in. And I was really conning all the mental patients out of their drugs, because that's, what I wanted to take. And they didn't want to take it, so I'll take it. And so I got all that I thought I wanted. And my alcoholism was never addressed. All kinds of straitjacket, shock treatment. And the straitjacket has a significance, and I'm getting to that very quickly. But I was in there 4 months, and my alcoholism was never talked about. Anything else I did to put in this body to change my mood or alter my mind was never talked about, was never addressed. And I left there with the same problem I walked in with. And a couple years later, I became pregnant with my first child. And the father of that child said, "I'd like for you to see a psychiatrist." Well, I thought that was a good idea, because I knew psychiatrists had prescription drug pads. And so, okay. And really, I was just getting him to shut up, get him off my back. And so I went to see the psychiatrist, and the 4th time in, he really wasn't writing any prescriptions for me. I was just not getting that. And 4th time in, he said, "I want you to go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings." And I said, "What is that?" That's the first person in my life that had ever said those words to me. I had never heard those words before. I'd never known about anything like that before. I'd never known what that was. I didn't know what it was. I said, "What in the world is that?" He said, "It will help you with your alcoholism." What? I don't have alcoholism. I don't have a problem. Why would I need to go to those meetings? And he said, "Yeah, according to what you've shared with me in these last 4 visits, I do believe those meetings would help you." I said, "I don't need any help." And he said, "Well, if you don't go there, I'm going to take you to court, and I can't take you to court for you killing yourself, but I can take you to court for you killing that baby. I can go to court and stand up for that child you're carrying." Well, every time I drank, and every time I put any other extracurricular activity inside my body, I said something. And what I said was, it wasn't for me. At least my thoughts weren't connected to me, but my thoughts were connected to my child. And it was, "It'll be okay this time." And that's all I said. "It'll be okay this time." Fundamental idea, maybe a fundamental idea. I don't know. And that's what I said. And I couldn't not drink. I couldn't not. I was to the point where, of course, I had to have it. And that doctor gave me 3 days to make up my mind. And I called several people. And the last person I called was my father. And he's really the last person on the face of the earth that I'd really ever want to ask anything for. And I called him, and I told him all of this sad story. And you know, what everybody was doing to me, and whoa, feel sorry for me, and used the pregnant card and used all the cards I thought I had. And he said, I'll call you back. He called me back in less than 2 minutes and said, I don't care if there's 12 foot of snow on the ground and you had a newborn baby in your arms, I would not open my door for you. And therefore, after hanging up that phone, I had one decision to make. And I knew that the crazy house wasn't a place for me because I really wasn't like those people. I knew that I just wasn't the same as that. I knew that I didn't belong in one of those places. And some of the things that I experienced there weren't good. They weren't really good at all. And so I decided I'd go to this treatment center that he recommended. And I went in telling them exactly what they were going to do and what they weren't going to do, and how I was going to be and how I wasn't going to be, and this and that. And in one of those meetings at that treatment center, they opened this big book right here, To the Doctor's Opinion. And started reading about the disease of alcoholism and the phenomenon of craving once the alcohol. And I went all the way back to that 12-year-old little girl that the first time I ever put it in, I never stopped. Never had a thought of stopping. Never had a thought there was anything wrong. Never had a thought I'd ever stop. I was going to die that way. And dying wasn't a bad thing. That was my life. And I never was ever known about this as a disease. And then the best thing they did was they got us in a bus and took us over to the AA meetings, local AA meetings. And, you know, there I got to see what that doctor was talking about. And I got to feel in my heart how he said, I believe those meetings will help you. I felt it in my heart that they would help me immediately, essentially. And I listened. And if I could have spoke, I could have said the same words y'all were saying. You were telling my story right out loud. And you had a twinkle in your eye, and you had laughter in your voice, and you greeted each other, and you loved each other. I saw that, and I felt it. More than seeing it, I felt it. And I know what that was. That was, again, that fundamental idea of God. I'm going to read one thing out of the 12 and 12. Even these last gaspers often had difficulty in realizing how hopeless they actually were. But a few did. And when these laid hold of AA principles with all the fervor with which the drowning sees life preservers, they almost invariably got well. Well, I became a last gasper because I desperately wanted to be a part of what you had, part of you. I had been searching for all of the gifts y'all had all my life. And I found it. You know, as I became last gasper, I totally threw myself into Alcoholics Anonymous. And the way that before I left treatment, they said, you got to have a sponsor. I hadn't gotten one yet. And I said, okay, so there was a lady that met me in the lobby of that treatment center I went in. And the reason she had to calm me down because I was very loud in the lobby of that treatment center. And so she came and rescued me out of there and brought me to her office because I was being quite loud. And she sat me down and I said, I've been in a crazy house before. It didn't happen. She said, I have too. I said, I've had a straitjacket on. She said, I have too. That's who I got to be my sponsor because she had a straitjacket on like I had. And I never met anybody that had one of those on. So because we had something in common, I knew she could help me. Well, she was also in recovery, but come to find out she wasn't in AA, but she did sponsor me through the first 5 steps. And then she said, I believe you need to find a sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I did. She was in Overeaters Anonymous, but we made quite a pair, her and I. But she worked out of the big book. We read the big book together. She took me through those steps as the big book is written in the big book. And I loved her. And she did say, get another sponsor. And I got a sponsor in AA. And we picked up, we started over in the steps and we worked the steps, alcoholic to alcoholic, side by side, walking hand in hand. And step 2, I had to borrow my sponsor's God. I didn't believe. I really didn't believe. So she said I could. She said I could borrow hers. Believe that she believed, and I did. I'd say, help me stay sober today. And I'd hit my knees and do that. Help me stay sober. And at night I'd say, thank you. And step 3, that was a hard one for me. I was still in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous exercising my will. And I didn't know that till I got to step 3. And I realized that there was a struggle going on between me and this higher power who gave me, I knew, gave me my seat in Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew that part. But that's well and good. I can take care of all of these other things. And this was around about the time that I had my baby girl. And that first sponsor was in the delivery room with me. Because I didn't have any family. I just burned every bridge I had. And she was in there, and when I laid eyes on that baby girl, I knew there was a God. I knew that I could, at that point in time, turn my will and my life over to the care. Because all I had done early in my pregnancy was beautiful. All the fingers, all the toes, just a beautiful baby girl. She's 37 years old today and has my 2 grandkids, 11-year-old granddaughter, 4-year-old grandson, and I'm intimately a part of their life in a very intimate way. And I'm grateful every time I get the opportunity to be with them. That's the kind of thing that Alcoholics Anonymous can do for us that I couldn't do for myself. Fundamental idea. About a year and 4 months sober, I got the job of my life. It was at 7-Eleven. Y'all heard of 7-Eleven? And I thought that was the greatest job in the world. Anyway, my goal at my job was to make everybody happy and smile before they left the door. I didn't have any idea, it was just the best I could do. I had a little baby at home. I was working the second shift mainly, and the third shift person didn't show up one night. My little daughter was at home. Her father was babysitting her. And guy comes in the store and asks to look at the phone book. And I said, okay, put the phone book on there. And I'm kind of milling around. I'm really tired, but I'm milling around the store, kind of trying to take care of things and stuff. And some of y'all know this. I'm talking to an older crowd like myself. There was a phone booth. Young people don't even know what a phone booth is. Outside, hanging on the outside of the store. And he'd walk out the door, this man that wanted to see the phone book and use that phone that was on the outside, hanging on the outside of the store. Young people don't even know what I'm talking about. However, he came back in the store for the 3rd time, and I happened to be on the same side of the counter, not behind where the register was, but on the same side he was, and he put a knife to my throat. And he grabbed me from behind. And he said, you're coming with me. All I want is you. And he drugged me out of that store. And my knee, at that moment that he put that knife to my throat, my knees buckled. My knees buckled, and I didn't know whether I was going to live or die. And he took me out of the store and put me in the floorboard of the passenger seat of his car, and he drove off. And he took me to this field, and he raped me, and he left me handcuffed to a tree. And as tough, as horrible, as hard as that experience was, what I learned was that this time in my life, I really, truly wanted to live. I wanted to live. My life was in someone else's hands. And because I was me, I had become worthy through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, worthy to want to live. And that was the miracle of that circumstance. I was in the floorboard of that car when he was driving to the field, and the only thing I can remember was the Serenity prayer, and I'm saying it over and over in my head. Serenity prayer, over and over and over and over and over. Maybe 20th time he puts his hand gently on the top of my head. He said, I'm not going to hurt you as long as you do what I want you to do. That was answered prayer. Then I knew I was going to get through that to the other side so that I could still live and continue to learn to love myself. Want things for myself, not because I was a daughter, a mother, a sponsor, a sponsee, but because of me. I was enough. I was enough to want to live. I had never felt that way in my life. Never. And so that experience gave me that gift. And some guys found me and took me to a phone. One thing about these guys is they were crystal meth heads, and they were really high on crystal meth. But the truth is, who else could I have related to at that point? They came and they helped me. They undid the handcuffs from the tree. They took me to the telephone. They talked to the police. They took the police back to the scene of the crime. They showed them everything that was there. And they said, if you need anything, if you need anything at all. Now, my alcoholism was to the point where if I'd have wanted to help somebody else, besides being so self-centered and it all about me, I didn't have the wherewithal to help anybody. These guys that day, God brought them there and showed them that they could be of service to somebody in the midst of their illness. What a miracle. That whole thing. Fundamental idea. I believed. And that day, my higher power gave me the will to live. And I had never had that gift ever in my life till then. I'll tell you a story about this man I called on the phone to ask for help. If I could come to his house, that's my father. Never seen him sober a day in his life. Never seen the man cry. Only violence, only yelling, beating, cussing, and sexual abuse as well. I went and picked him up and took him to a treatment center in where I was living. And I took another alcoholic with me. And 2:00 in the morning, I showed up at his house, and he comes in like every night. I've seen him my whole life, bouncing off the walls, intoxicated. And he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, we'll talk about that in the morning." And me and another alcoholic did this 12-step call on him. And I said, basically, you're going to get in the car. You're going to go to treatment for alcoholism. And he got in the car. And he went with me. And he went to that treatment center, and they detoxed him. And he had had a heart transplant 2 years before this time. So he's on a lot of anti-rejection medication. And that treatment center was afraid to keep him beyond the safety of detoxing him. He drank for 50 years. And, but he did on his own, without my help, find another center that would take him for an inpatient treatment program. It was the VA hospital. And on weekends, he would have a outing, and he'd come stay with me. Well, I told him one weekend night, Friday night, I said, we're going to go to my home group tonight. Well, I happened to be telling my story. And that man sat right beside me as I shared my story that I shared with you tonight. And we got up to say the Lord's Prayer. And he said, can I say something? And I said, sure. He was crying. Never seen him cry in my life. He said, that day she called me and asked for me to come to my house. I hung up the phone. And before I called her back, it's the first time in my life I ever prayed to God for the answer. And God said the word no. And he called me back immediately. And he said, you're not coming here. That was the day I got sober. And I made amends with him during that time. He was at that treatment center. And I just told him all of the harm, all the experience that I'd had as a child melted away. As what happens in step 8, that willingness to be willing, it just happens, and God circumcises the heart to be the heart of his own, God's own heart. And the day I made amends to that man, my father, I told him, I know I've hurt you. I know that the days and nights that you didn't know whether I was alive or dead, I know I hurt you. And I want to be in your life. I want to be a part of your life. I want you to know that I'm okay. I want to know that you're okay. I want to share your life with you. And he said, to see you today is immense enough for me. And I want to share my life with you. And he stayed sober. I had his 6-month chip. And he went back to drinking. And he died 8 months sober. But he wasn't sober, but about 8 months after. He had a 6-month chip, went back to drinking, then he died. But God gave us that time for him to really know that I was good. I was okay, and I was going to be okay. And for us to have that special bond that only Alcoholics Anonymous could give us in the steps. Thank you for listening. Thanks for having me.